Welcome to Beyond the Wild podcast, where we go venturing beyond the gear, beyond the subject, beyond the shot, to find the heart of wildlife and adventure creative. Beyond the Wild podcast is brought to you by Pictureline.com, your online source for everything photography, and Canon USA. Listen in, we share tips and tactics learned from years of journeying into the wild. Your hosts are Jason Loftus, Ron Hayes, and myself, Mark Raycroft. Let's begin another episode of Beyond the Wild.
Welcome back to the Beyond the Wild podcast. We are, Mark and I. Mark, how are you? Welcome.
Thanks, Ron. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for asking. How about you?
Well, I'm good now because when we had the guest that we're going to have on tonight, when we had him on our previous podcast, and we were the first ones to cover his project, Mark and I were just talking. It's a lifetime project, but really for most of us, it would take 3 lifetimes to accomplish what tonight's guest accomplished. And when we had him on the Wild and Exposed podcast, I wasn't able to be there. So I'm excited tonight to be able to welcome Gary Kramer back to the show. And for the first time to be on the Wild. Mark got this lined up, and I appreciate you doing that, Mark. But I want to just welcome Gary back to the show.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be back. It was several years ago. You guys were absolutely the first podcast ever on the Waterfowl of the World book. And I think it got me a couple of sales at least.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure it got a lot.
That was our goal, too, Gary. Too.
There you go.
Yeah, I certainly hope it helped.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of that, it is the biggest book I think I own or have seen, and most comprehensive on waterfowl or any genre of natural history. And it's right before the podcast, I was talking to my wife, and she wanted me to tell you that she absolutely loves it. She has read it cover to cover more than once. And not only that, it's a fantastic reference tool for any of these waterfowl species, because you've got the great visuals that you're renowned for, and also the biological write-ups. It's incredibly comprehensive, and I feel privileged to have a signed copy, and that it is also a wonderful workout. Pick it up and put it down.
And it's so heavy, if you want to beat somebody with it, you could probably do a pretty good job, right?
Oh, guaranteed. You don't need your cast iron frying pan if you have this book.
Yeah.
For weight.
I was thinking before the show when Mark was lifting it up, and it's a good silencer too. When Mark has it up, his voice is louder. When he puts it down, it's a good muffler.
Hey, there you go.
But I was thinking before the show, it reminds me of the old encyclopedias when I was a kid, or when we were all kids, got all our information from encyclopedias, and they were the largest books in the library. And truly it is an encyclopedia of the waterfowl on our planet. Gary, just as a reminder, just real quick, what was the inspiration for taking that project on?
Well, it was I've been involved with waterfowl in one way or another my whole adult life. Started out hunting, ended up going to school, got degrees I got a bachelor's and master's in wildlife biology with waterfowl, my interest, and worked for the Fish and Wildlife Service as both a biologist and refuge manager. And it just was one of these things that kind of the end of my career, at least I thought it was the end of my career at that point, was to try to photograph every species of waterfowl on the planet, 167. And at first it started out as being pretty much a photo book, but as I got into it and really looked at the available literature, the ornithological literature, there was nothing that had all the biology, the current status and conservation, the range maps, except for a publication back in the 90s by Frank Todd. And that was old technology, slides and so on. And I just kind of jumped into it and decided to photograph them all and ended up doing it over a 4-year period. It took me about a year to write it, and then took 3 years to get the photos. And I ended up going to 40 countries in 36 months to get the images. So it was really the end of my career to kind of, a little bit of the payback, because I was able to give that book to Ducks Unlimited, California Waterfowl. And then when they sold it, they got half the profit off of that book to do good things for wildlife. And then half of it came back to me to reimburse me for my travel. So it kind of was one of those kind of a projects. And then it ended up being really accepted beyond my belief. I mean, I printed 4,000 copies and I got 400 left. So it really has been amazing. And really a feel-good project after all that work, that I'm able to give something back to the waterfowl resource based on the sales.
$3.99, because as soon as we're done here, I'm going to place my order. I don't have a copy yet.
Oh, there you go.
Mark, you were able to get in touch with Gary, and I think were you on the first time?
Yes.
So you guys covered a ton of ground, and I think my favorite story was the Papua New Guinea, or the New Guinea species that you were able to get. But what's one thing that you wish you would have asked Gary the first time around?
Oh, back to me. Okay. I just wanted to pause and have listeners reflect on one of the things he said quickly, because he describes so many elements of this fantastic volume quickly. 40 countries in 36 months. I mean, who's done that? And I mean, it's baffling and very impressive. So I was curious to know, I think we talked about the most difficult of the images to capture. And something else I want to highlight, about the book, is the photography is outstanding, right? It's you didn't get that with encyclopedias. There'd be some good imagery, but consistently wonderful images to represent all of these different species. Oh, I have a question. It's a funny one though. So sometimes I make animal sounds because I love playing with animal behavior. So, a duck is, but you're the expert. Is it easy to, and is it significantly different? I mean, that'd be like a mallard, right? So calls between different waterfowl, is there a tremendous variance? Because when you look at ducks, that the plumage is remarkably different from one to another and across the planet, but their structure has a similarity. Do you hear a lot of different vocalizations amongst the species that is very pronounced?
What I found, obviously a lot of these birds I'd never seen or heard, but what you find is that let's say you have a group of birds that are like mallard types. For instance, there's a yellow-billed duck in Africa that's, as far as their behavior, as far as the general size and kind of how they operate in the world, they're the mallard of Africa, and they sound so much like a mallard, it's unbelievable. Same thing with the Mexican duck, which is really a full species. Used to be a subspecies of our mallard, but it's a full species now. It sounds almost identical. So when you go to the places that have, or for instance, pintails, some of the pintails worldwide, like the ones in Argentina, the yellow-billed pintail and the white-cheeked pintail, they whistle very, very similar to ours. I mean, it isn't exact, but it's darn close. So you have these groups of birds, the mallard types, the pintail types, and the different various teals around the world. They have a lot of similarities in their sounds. It really is kind of amazing. And first you hear them, you're in Africa, and you hear this, you go, it can't be a mallard.
Right.
So it is amazing to hear the similarities in the sound.
And there's such variance between male and female drake and hen birds, and you've captured that so well. And the images throughout, I mean, their artwork. It's, I just want to emphasize that it's not only 524 pages, big pages, but the images really do it justice, so that you can fully appreciate all the different species in their grandeur.
Yeah, I made a real effort to, if you look at the book, there's kind of a pattern to it, and that is the lead photo. I made a real effort in most cases to get a male and a female so that the first look gives you both the species. And interestingly enough, some of the southern hemisphere birds, Australia in particular and South America, the male and female are almost identical. Usually there's a little bit less brilliance in the female. But I mean, that's one of the things that I learned early on was like, when do I go to Australia? Because I'm so used to, I don't want to go to Canada in August because all the mallards are going to be in eclipse plumage and looking, they'll be brown ducks, right? I want them in good plumage. So when do I go to Australia, opposite seasons, to get the plumage? Well, come to find out, because so many of them have identical plumage, and also some of the species in Australia, just as an example, the reason is they don't go through a true eclipse because they always have to be ready to breed. Because unlike ours, they breed, that move to the north, different seasons. A lot of those birds in Australia, as an example, breed based on rainfall. So if it rains out in the outback, they fly 300 miles to where the water is and they immediately breed. So they have to be in biological conditions. So as a result, you don't get the eclipse plumage and you get the male and female very similar in appearance. So, so I went, kind of didn't matter when I went to Australia because I was able to get the birds in good plumage every month of the year.
So yeah, that's a great observation. That helps me because I've just come back from there, and I was thinking that I've missed breeding seasons, and that's peak plumage typically. But the birds look just as beautiful, as far as I can tell, when I'm there during their winter, and so that explains a lot. And I'm looking at a pink-eared duck on page 323 from Australia, and the drake and hen look very, very close.
Yeah, they're essentially identical. And that's really the pink-eared duck's a good example of the ones that respond to habitat conditions. So they look the same every day of the year, and they can breed. There are certain months where the breeding is more common, but, there is breeding essentially every month of the year when the conditions are right, as opposed to our northern hemisphere ducks that, that just doesn't happen. They breed in a very distinct season.
And I caught you said several of the Australia species. Is that something that you found southern hemisphere wide? So when you get to South America,
a lot of the South American birds have identical plumage, male and female. There are some species, and it's strange because there are the South American species that we go down there to hunt. There's about 13 species that you can, in a great place, if you were to go hunting in South America, you could shoot 13 species. The majority of those have no sexual dimorphism. The male and female look alike. But then you have a bird like a ringed teal, and all of a sudden it has male and female just like the northern hemisphere. It's really odd. And same thing with a black-headed duck. But most of them don't. So the majority of the southern hemisphere birds, Africa, Australia, and South America, very little sexual dimorphism. That is, the male and female look pretty close.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Hey, Gary, I don't remember this question being asked, but you're a guy this project was a 4-year project, but that's a drop in the bucket to your whole career as a wildlife manager. What was your favorite ever wildlife or outdoor experience?
As far as in what regard?
It could be anything. It could be something that you filmed, something that you photographed. Could be just a memory that you have of being out. Doesn't necessarily have to be wildlife related.
Well, I'll tell you what, on the subject of this book, the one that Mark mentioned was the Papua New Guinea. I mean, that probably was the single most rewarding thing that I did in that whole book, because you take a species that when I looked on the internet prior to going, there was not one what I consider usable professional level photo of that duck. Salvatore's teal is the name of it. It just didn't exist. I mean, there were photos where, through a digiscope where you put a camera on a scope, super fuzzy, or ones that were cropped so heavy. I mean, so if you had a good photo of that, it didn't exist. And you have to go to the ends of the earth to get that thing. It's found only in the mountains of Papua New Guinea. which you got to go to Australia first, and you fly to Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea. Then you take a flight up to a mining town up in the mountains. Has a flight every day, but it only makes it 2 or 3 days a week because the weather's so shitty. It's raining. It's horrible. Then when you get there, I had a buddy that went with me on that because he wanted to see that bird too, and other stuff in Australia that we photographed. But you see the bird. We saw it the first afternoon. A pair in a river. They're a riverine species. They're never in flocks. They're always in pairs or family groups. And as soon as we got out of the car, 150 yards away, it flew away. Well, the thing is, in Papua New Guinea, if it flies, it dies. Kids have BB guns, pellet guns, 22s, shotguns. If it has a plume on it, they shoot it for a headdress, and if they can eat it, they eat it. So they're super wary. And I spent what amounted to 10 hours, 6 days a week for less than 5 minutes of photography. Because what I do is get a blind on the river, see birds the day before in that general area, and hope that when I got in there in the dark, set in the blind, and they would come, drifting by the river. But for one reason or another, something happened in every situation except for one afternoon. I got, maybe 4 minutes of photography. So that's when I got it. And I was dreading going back to that place. Expensive to get to, difficult to move around, rains all the time. It was a, rainforest. And so as far as really somebody gives me a job to do, to fulfill that job and get a photo of that bird, which is a professional level, from my photographic career, that was probably the peak, actually.
Yeah, that story is amazing.
On page 275, you can get it there with light reflection. Pretty amazing.
And
that's the epitome of patience. As what people.
Yeah, it was. I was dreading having to go back to that place because it was, it was just a rugged place to get to. Bad weather. Another situation which was interesting after that same duck, I had 2 young guys as guides. Thank goodness. And every morning once we would find them, we would actually go through the jungle with a machete to get to the river. And we're one guy in front, one guy in back, all got headlights on. I'm carrying my, 600 millimeter lens. And all of a sudden, we are attacked by insects. I mean, they're biting us in our face. They're in our clothes. It was raining too. And on our arm. And it was like a horror film, where you run around and run in circles and try to get away from them. Well, after we got through it, I said, "What was that?" He said, "Those are called electric ants because every time they bite you, it's like an electric shock. And what I must have done is that they're nesting in trees, and I must have put the machete through the middle of that nest." I mean, it was unbelievable. So there was stuff like that went on through this whole. I got a million of them, right?
Well, that's the interesting thing. I think the most asked question that I ever get, when you're speaking or anything, is how long did it take you to get that image? And the story behind that, there's always a lot more than just the time, for the images that we covet. And that story about the electric ants, that kind of tells the other side of that. It's not just the time involved. There was a lot of time involved and patience and fortitude, but also the bug bites and the discomfort that you experience while you're waiting for the shot to develop. That's the part that nobody ever wants to hear about. They just want to know, how long did it take you to get it?
Yeah. And it's just like the photos I see, your guys' photos that you post, is that you'll see a picture of a caribou or wherever, and the people just go, "Oh, nice shot." But where did you have to go to get that caribou? What was the weather like? There's so many variables. So therefore, as a photographer, when I see a good one, I truly appreciate it because I know it. Occasionally, you get the easy ones, right, out the window of a car, whatever. But a lot of these are very, very difficult to put together, no matter what our subjects are, whether it be a duck in Papua New Guinea, whether it be a caribou in Canada, whether it be, whatever. It really is more to it than people ever dream.
Well, there's something I'd like to share on that regard too. And I mean, there's all these elements to make a picture come to fruition, an image, not just the skill, but the time, the effort, the physical, the investment, the planning, the travel, bookings, all of it, weather, all multitude of variables. So Picasso was sitting in a restaurant, and he just drew on a napkin, sketched somebody in the restaurant, and this lady came over and said, but I'd like to buy that from you. And he said, sure. And she said, I'll give you $10. And he said, no. She says, why not? She said, how much? And he said, 4,000. And she says, wow, how can it be that expensive? It's a napkin. You just did it in 10 minutes. And he says, no, I've been doing it for 40 years. You just were here for 10 minutes of it. So when you let that sink in, the professionalism, the skill set that you have to make this volume, the 4 years is impressive to think about, but it's much beyond that. All of these elements to put a project of this scale together takes much longer, like your professional career, to build that skill set, to make it happen. So I just wanted to elaborate on that so listeners appreciate that it's not simply that. Like you say, when you go out and take a photo, it's much deeper than an image. And a project like this, the 4 years is the culmination and the physical time and effort. But the skill to build that was decades to do it.
Yeah,
So
the thing is that, well, thank you so much. And the thing is that really what made it possible is just because of my background, having the biological background that I did, having time working for the Fish and Wildlife Service, real time in the field as a biologist, getting to know things about waterfowl in general, pretty intimate. And then the photography, which you guys as photographers, that you make that leap, and all of a sudden, when you start spending 10 hours in a blind, you learn the behavior of that bird or that species. And you put all that together, and then with your photography, and that's kind of what makes it. Just a biologist couldn't have done it, a photographer couldn't have done it, or somebody who observed nature couldn't have done it. It really kind of had to be all three, and I was very fortunate that I had all those factors behind me. Plus, 45 years of doing it in some fashion. Because even when I worked for the service, I photographed and did articles for outdoor magazines. It's just that it wasn't full time. And then I took an early out from the service and been at this full time for 25 years now, which is a long time. And I worked for the service for 26, so that's a bunch of years.
And
we
all
just
that
had this conversation a couple weeks ago, and I'm glad that you brought it up. You, as a biologist, you get to see behaviors, but you don't necessarily see the minutia of details in the behaviors. And as photographers, I think it gives us the ability to sit and to observe and to note those behaviors in a much deeper way than just someone who just studies the animal. For, let's just say, population dynamics, you don't see the intimate moments that each of these species have. What was the most surprising behavior that you saw when you took this project on, or when you were working on this project?
Well, as far as the waterfowl species, the ones that I was the least familiar with were some of the riverine ducks, like African black duck you find in pretty swift rivers, or torrent ducks. And, torrent duck is a great example, found in South America, found in pretty much high elevation streams like trout streams. And they behave, they're in there, they're not mergansers, but they behave a lot like that in that fast water. So we're so used to seeing waterfowl in wetlands or in large rivers or in the ocean, sea ducks. But it's the riverine species, and there's several around the world that have adapted really precisely to that kind of an environment. So those were kind of cool to see. And then there's also things like the nene, which is I guess the answer is the adaptations that I've seen. They're all waterfowl. They're all it's all fruit, but it's apples and oranges kind of a thing, because you have all this adaptation to the environments that they're in. Nene's a good example. Their feet aren't even webbed like a normal goose because they feed primarily in upland areas. And really the only time they're around water is when they have young, and the young will go to the water for escape, but they've lost the webbing. There's also a number of species of ducks that have lost the ability to fly. So there's flightless species. There's 2 in New Zealand that are flightless, and then there's 3 in South America that are flightless. So you have a situation where they've adapted to their environment. They can still feed, they can still evade predators, but the 2 in New Zealand are island species. There's no land predators. So over many, many thousands of years, their wings have got so small they actually can't fly. So the adaptations that you see within waterfowl is fascinating to me, and I can see it up close and personal by going there, and there it is, So that was really a interesting and very enlightening part of this, whole field time I spent with, chasing these guys around the world.
You don't think with New Zealand that they got there and liked it so much they just stopped flying?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the 2 are found on these islands that are so far from anything. It's like amazing how far they are. It took a 10-day cruise and 2.5 days on that ship to get to the island.
So you're not talking about the North or South Island, New Zealand. You're talking about a sub-island.
Yeah, sub-island of New Zealand. It's 2.5 days by boat to get to it. It's Campbell Island and Auckland Island, which are 2 little tiny islands, 400 miles off the coast of New Zealand in the Southern Ocean. It's closer to Antarctica than it is anywhere.
Wow. Is that I remember the story about getting on, like, some of the boats. Was that the work crew boat one? Or is that a different one I'm remembering that you got on?
I'm trying to think.
It was hard. It was really hard to get on this ship.
Well, that's the one duck I didn't get.
That's the story. Okay. All right.
That was that story.
So this one, sorry, you said 400 miles offshore.
Yeah, what it is that it's a 10-day natural history cruise that's put together for people. I mean, there's penguins there, albatross, tremendous bird, populations on these sub-Antarctic islands below New Zealand. And it's a 10-day cruise, and it takes 2.5 days to get to the first island. But, I wasn't there to go see the albatross. I was there to get these 2 flightless ducks. It's called a Campbell teal and an Auckland teal. And you get 1 day at each island. And if it's too rough and you can't get in the Zodiac to get to the island, then you're not going to get this bird. You got to go back again. So it was, you go to the very southern port of New Zealand, get on this ship, and it wasn't cheap either to do. 2.5 days, it was victory at sea. It was like, hang on. The first morning, there were 80 people on the boat. 8 of us make it to breakfast. The rest of everybody's sick. We get to the island, and I'm going, oh my God, here we are taking this cruise, and I'm going to get there, and it's going to be so rough we can't get to the beach. Well, we roll in there. It ended up being the warmest and calmest day they'd had the whole year, and it was in December, so 12 months. Got in the Zodiac. It was like a lake. Going to the beach, all the other folks, took off with a guide to go walk around and look at the stuff. And I had made arrangements to say, hey, look, I just need to get off the boat. I'm not going to go with you. I need to go find this duck, right? So the Zodiac rolls into the beach. I said, man, where should I start looking? He says, oh, there's one right there. It was literally about 20 feet from me. Went over and I photographed those ducks with impunity for the next, essentially all day. Then we had an overnight run to the other island. Same situation, super calm. Found the bird. Very lucky that it all paid out even with sun and nice weather. In those southern islands, the sun never shines. Wow. So it was really a fun deal overall.
So this is a second conversation. Obviously I wasn't on the first, but it's a second conversation about this project. And every sentence that I listened to the first time and everything that I've heard you say tonight, just in the little bit of time we've been on, it's incredible that you completed this in three years, getting your images. It just seems like everything had an obstacle to it. and it was one challenge after the next that had to be overcome to make this happen.
Yeah, it was, the thing was, is I look at this book now and I kind of don't believe that I actually did it, because you're absolutely right. There was something in the way of almost everything, but I was fortunate. Number one, you're going to a place that you've never been to. Most places, almost all of them, except for places like New Zealand where I didn't need to, or Iceland. But I hired a guide, and they're mostly birding guides. They're really not photographers. So I'm going to a place I've never been to a species of waterfowl that I've never seen, with a person I've never met. And the only criteria I had to select the people was how quick they would answer an email. Because if they waited a week, I'm not interested in people like that. I'm in too much of a hurry to get these photos. And the second thing was, I would say, for instance, this is a very, very focused photographic trip for these 4 species of waterfowl. And if they, or maybe 6, it just depended on where it was. If they came back and they said, hey, no problem, we can get them all in a day, I'm going to delete that guy, because that's got to be a lie. It's impossible to do that. So, or they would come back saying, we can find all the grebes you want and shorebirds and this and that. I got to get deleted, because I told them specifically what I wanted. But if they came back and said, look, the 6 are here, 3 of them are going to be pretty easy, 2 of them I think we can get it, and 1 of them is going to be near impossible, then I believed them. And that's kind of the way it played out when you got there, is that you get 3 or 4 that was like you just nail them, a couple that you really had to work on, and maybe 1 you didn't get. Or you got it, maybe not as many photos. So I was very fortunate in getting people that were pretty helpful. And the first thing I had to do, as you guys know, is I had to school them up on photography. They're birding guides. They would show me a goose at, 150 yards. I'd say, that's worthless to me. I can't do a thing with 150, 200 yards. You're used to dealing with birders they're the easiest people on the planet to please, because they find their bird, they leave. I'd have to tell them, look, I need to get within 30 meters. I can maybe live with 50, and I really like 20 meters, even with a 600, right? So so I always had to kind of school them up initially. And most of them really did get it. And pretty soon, by day 2 or 3, they'd quit showing me birds there they are at 200 yards. We'd just drive by, and we'd have to figure out how to do it. So I was very fortunate in the people that I got a hold of. I never gave up. It was like, okay, it's sunrise to sunset until it's done. And I kind of did enough research and knowing about biology of birds. A lot of it's so similar to ours that I could kind of figure out that if I'm going after a yellow-billed duck in Africa, it's going to be in an environment similar to a mallard. So that's kind of where I went, and so on and so forth. There was a lot of analogies that I could use where I had success in the U.S. or Canada or Mexico. I could use that same technique, and most of it was really getting there in the dark, in waders, camo. I had times that was a weird deal, and getting there in the dark in the tules or the cattails where I had seen birds the day before, and just wait. I'm there in the dark. I don't disturb them. One of the interesting things about the whole wader camo is I photographed in downtown Seoul, South Korea. There was about 200 mandarin ducks that were in a river right in the middle of town. It was almost like the LA River, except the sides were dirt, but it was freeways on both sides. So I got in the dark. I had to walk down a street, over a bridge on the side of the freeway, which there's no access, and then down to the river in the dark, camoed up with some camo cloth, and I had killed almost all the mandarin shots are in the book, at least the group shots are from that, and I photographed those guys successfully. But when I quit at 10 a.m., I'm walking back by the freeway, over the bridge in downtown Seoul, South Korea, with the people. I was the only guy they've ever seen with camo jacket, camo hat, waders on, with a giant camera, walking down a main street of the town. People were pointing at me. Well, they weren't just glancing. They were like, "Look at that gringo," kind of a thing. So that was, and actually I met the guy, and then I met the guide I had in a Starbucks. Yeah, it was in a Starbucks. I met him in a Starbucks there in downtown Seoul, South Korea. So all kind of stuff, city stuff to mostly in the country, but in the wild. But there was a few city things like that.
That's
It'd be like a
incredible.
time traveler. People see
Right?
it and just stand out. Yeah, that would. That's wonderful to hear. I mean, it's just the diversity of where this project took you, and it's the number of images in this book. And something I'd like to say too about it is it's not just a great or the best reference tool for waterfowl biology around the world with all of these species. If you're a bird photographer, this is where we train our eyes, right? This is with the diversity of imagery. We look at what's successful, look at compositions, look at what's possible, all these amazing in-flight shots, how it's done, the space around them. It's a wonderful tool to train one's eye for going in the field to photograph waterfowl. And there's 1,299 images. Now I know Gary probably wanted 1,300.
Yeah, it's a way of playing out when I counted them, right?
Yeah.
Well, 1,299 is probably it ticks the box. That's substantial. But yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, amazing.
Well, one of the things that I didn't count on, it actually has become very popular with taxidermists for taxidermy references.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big taxidermy houses actually, they went to a show recently and bought, a bunch of books and sold them at the show because there's so many different poses in there of so many species that the taxidermists, and I never anticipated that at all. I figured it'd be mostly duck hunters. It'd be, students and academia would use it and things like that. But the taxidermists love it because it has so many different poses. And I really made an effort not just to have ducks on water. Those things, everybody can get a duck on the water, but, to get habitat, to get behaviors, courtship flights, things like that. I got some of my favorites are courtship flights of yellow-billed, red-billed teal in Africa. They behave just like our pintails. And here they are doing a courtship flight, and it's just really cool to get that.
Hey, Gary, another question that comes up a lot is success rate. So, you take 1,000 pictures of how many of those are keepers. So you had, I always say about, 5 to 10%, you're doing really good. 1% might be real standout images. You had 1,299 images that made the book. How many images did you take on this project? Did you track that?
I say the same thing as you guys do. It's 5 to 10 that you just keep after you hit the delete button 1,000 times. So if you figure there was that many, you're right. It's probably 1 to 2% of what I took. And it depends on the species. It takes something like a pintail. I mean, I have, 3,000 keepers of pintails. I mean, in the Pacific Flyway at the refuge that I managed, which is 7 miles from my house, it's probably one of the best places to photograph pintails in the world. So I got a lot of those. But when it came to the Salvatore's teal, I only had about 15 keepers that I could pick from. So on the other hand is the Madagascar poacher, which is the rarest duck in the world. At the time I photographed them in Madagascar, there was something like 63 birds in the world in one lake, but they were habituated to the researchers. They were wild, swimming around, but they were habituated to a canoe, not to people walking around, but this yellow canoe they had seen a lot. And I ended up getting lots and lots of pictures of the rarest duck in the world when I thought that would be difficult. And it took 6 days to get there, but once I got there, I got the photos.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
The places this took you. So that was just it, knowing the locals in some of those situations with these, well, in this case, such an endangered population, but these subpopulations, if they become habituated to something, there could be an end to facilitate that. Like, you hopped in the yellow canoe and it worked.
I had no idea when I got there what it would be like, but how difficult it would be. But there's only 63 birds on one lake. But the interesting thing is it's like wildlife refuges. Where you get lots of people going to an observation tower. I mean, there's places here in the Central Valley that I can go and photograph pintails at really, 15 meters. And they don't fly away from you. But it's only because a lot of people go to that observation area. So you find a few of those things here and there. But most places in the world weren't like that. Most places outside the U.S. and Canada, everything's wild because, Argentina, they're hunted a lot. But a lot of places like Papua New Guinea, they're actually, still, people still want to eat them if they can get a hold of them. There are places in England, though, which were super interesting. The Wildfowl Trust, they have maybe as many as 10 locations which are sanctuaries. And they have both wild birds that they feed. We're kind of off in the U.S., we say we don't want to feed the ducks, but there it's a real common practice, and they feed them, and you get hundreds of birds coming in that are used to being fed every day. And there's a number, they're all wild, but they're just used to being fed. So literally you can photograph those. They're super habituated to the feed and to people, and you can just sit there on a park bench and photograph them. So there are a few places like that, but that's a really unique situation. Usually it's the opposite. Usually it's tough.
Just to quickly add on to the benefit of taxidermists when trying to replicate the anatomy accurately in different positions of the waterfowl, I just wanted, once again, just to remind, being a wildlife nature photography podcast, that it really is a standout publication to train as far as photographic composition for all the people here. Can you guys hear that coming in?
Yeah.
I have to figure out how to mute that. That, for everybody listening, is me having another idea.
How's that work?
I think everybody knows that that's somebody else having an idea. They just don't know that you're having a conversation, right?
Trying to get my attention. Yeah, I am educated enough at podcasting to mute my phone, but my laptop still gets an email. I'll work on that later, everybody. To-dos.
So, Gary, what was the most unique location? I know, the tougher species in Papua New Guinea. What was the most unique location that you were able to experience during this project?
The unique location, I'll say, were the ones where I was surprised. There were two locations that were incredible because it had lots of species, as well as not only was the species diversity, there were a lot of birds to photograph, and they were relatively easy to get close to compared to a lot of places, and that was Iceland. Iceland has Lake Mývatn is a real famous lake in Iceland that's known for its breeding waterfowl, and there was an amazing array of birds there, and you could get relatively close. But the most interesting thing about that is that I had that planned, and then COVID hit, so that was all canceled out. And I had to get there. There's about a 6-week window. Iceland is unique in the fact that there's birds from Europe that migrate there to breed, and there's birds from North America. One of the few places where you get both European species and North American species side by side. I mean, a good example is harlequins breed there, quite a few, but you would get a common scoter from Europe that would be in the same general area. So that got canceled. But then I was watching the internet, and I noticed that they were giving special permits this was full on in the spring of 20, for movie crews, because apparently they film a lot of movies in Iceland, for scientists and journalists. So I figured, well, I can qualify as a scientist and a journalist. So I sent an email on a Sunday night to where it said to send it. I got a reply from the government on Monday. On Tuesday, I got another reply that says your permit has been granted. And on Wednesday, I had a signed letter by the head guy in the Department of Foreign Affairs giving me access to Iceland. I flew to Boston, one flight a week on Iceland Air. There were 8 people on a 777 that normally takes over 400. I got there to the same place I had canceled, which was going to be 900 for a week. Now it's 300 for a week, and there was nobody there. When I got off the airplane, the guy says, you're the first American we've seen in a long time. It was and the birds were super good. And then the other place was Punta Arenas, Chile. It has a lot of the species in South America. You can get relatively close to them. And that was amazing for diversity. I had an excellent guide there. Those were the two real standouts where there was a lot of diversity, a lot of birds, and relatively easy to get close to.
That's interesting. I just was looking at Punta Arenas on a map this afternoon. That's crazy. We were looking at Cape Horn and talking about where we would structure a trip to photograph penguins.
Oh, yeah.
And we just kind of stumbled across it. Hey, Gary, taking on a project this big, obviously you've been photographing for a long time. At what point did you feel like you were photographically and maybe technologically ready to take this trip on? I mean, is that something that you waited on, or was it just more waiting on the timing of your career?
I think it was really a combination of things. One is that digital photography there's really two things that I think made this possible. One is, if you don't get a little bit better every year, you ought to quit, right? That's what we all strive for, is that you don't need to be 50% better, but you need to be 5% better or 3% better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what happened, is that over the years, you kind of get to where you're pretty solid in what you can accomplish. But really, what made it possible was digital photography. Many of these images were taken at 3200 ISO. You go back to the slide days, the best you're going to do is 400, and that was horrible. And it was really 200. It was really Fuji 100 pushed to 200. So you have so much more leeway for low light. This wouldn't have been possible to do with slides or even early digital. But because the technology had got to a point that I could shoot, I bet you 50% of them were shot at 3200 ISO. That's that potentially can ruin a photo 15 years before or 10 years before. In early digital, that you couldn't do it. The second was just the internet, because back in the day, you'd be sending a fax to some guy in Papua New Guinea. Can you be my guide, and what are you going to charge me? Whereas the internet opened the world up, and the fact I could shoot an email to a guy in India, Papua New Guinea, it didn't matter, and I could get a response in 24 hours. So those are the two things that really, really made it possible, I believe. And the fact is that at that point in my career, if I figured if I got there, I wasn't going to choke. I'd get the photo, I'd stick with it. I mean, all those things were gone out of my head, those worries. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I think made it.
It's interesting because you have people spending money to go all over the world. I mean, we take people on workshops. You yourself, we'll get into that in a minute, but you yourself are leading workshops at different locations. People spending a lot of money, and if their skill set is not there, part of doing a workshop is to improve yourself and improve your photography. But you can do that incrementally. But if you're spending that kind of money, you want to make sure you're getting the shot. So I was just curious that if that played a role in your waiting to take this on, is just when you felt like, you were very confident in your skills and ready to go and ready to make this commitment.
Yeah, I mean, that really was it. That along with the fact is that the technology and the cameras themselves allowed me to do things that would be tough, and I could get a hold of people to help, because you can't do this blind. You gotta go do, I mean, there were people that helped me that were amazing. And there's people that I paid. There's people I didn't. I had a guy, and a good example is Australia. I would look on Instagram and see, okay, here's really this is pretty good stuff from Australia. And then I would look and see who took it, or whatever country it might be. And this particular person, I shot him an email, and I said, hey, look, I'm working on this book. Here's a little bit about my background. All I ask is can you point me in the right direction? Because he lived in Tasmania. I said, I know that there's some birds down there that I'd love to get. All I ask is point me in the right direction. Well, next thing you know, he comes back with an email and says, hey, I checked out your website, yada, yada, the whole deal. He says, and come to find out, this guy was an excellent photographer. He had an environmental consulting firm. He was a world's expert on albatross. And he said, you come to Australia, I will guide you for free. You pay my expenses. We'll photograph side by side. Which I said, man, that's a good deal. I flew to Tasmania, met me at the airport, went to his house for 2 nights, spent the next 8 or 10 days with the guy. We became close friends. And he learned from, like when I would put my waders on and go in the dark, and he goes, I've never seen anybody do that before. So, and everywhere he went, he had it pre-scouted. So we would go from Tasmania to Melbourne, and he'd have somebody with a local there that had already pre-scouted. I mean, the guy was incredible. as far as the help, because he just loved doing it and could see that he was able to go to these places that he hadn't even been. So I did have some incredible help like that. And then a lot of the guys, most of the guys I paid, but a guy like that, he just said, hey, so we're friends at this point. I still email him and still see him on Instagram. So you have people that have like minds like that really wanted to help. So that was super good.
That's
There's
interesting.
so many wonderful layers. I mean, all the people you've got to meet, the places you've seen that this project facilitated, it's fantastic. And I think it's worth also thinking about the fact that, the internet has brought all this so much closer and more capable for people to follow their passions like this, but on this monumentous level for sure.
Yeah, you bet.
Gary, we kind of touched on it. So how do I go photograph with the most famous waterfowl photographer on the planet? You're leading trips now. You told us about a couple locations, but what are some of the things you're doing now that this project is complete?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've really, since I retired from the service, I've been doing, as you say, I don't really do workshops so much as do lead wildlife trips where photography is a big part of it. A bunch of the people come with cell phones. It's astounding that the photos they can get with their cell phones. So there's always a few people with some serious equipment, but by and large, most of them they got their cell phone and they're just going on a trip. The way I try to talk about them, and I don't do any advertisement, it's just all word of mouth, is that, I want to be there to see the animals, get up early. I book trips to Africa, and I do that on an annual basis, sometimes 2 times, sometimes even 3. I just got back from Botswana here about 3 weeks ago, and I had 12 people on that trip. I'm able to book a whole camp because there's 6 tents, so I get the whole camp. And there were, of the 12, there was myself and 2 others that had good equipment, and the rest of them were cell phones. But, this is not sleeping in till 8 o'clock and have breakfast and go out there at night. This is be out there at sunrise, get the photos in the morning when the light's good, take a midday break, and have photographed till dark. So, and people really, really, so it's kind of a wildlife intensive trip, but it isn't really a workshop like you guys do as much. So I do Africa, multiple countries. I do Galapagos on an annual basis. I rent a 100-foot yacht. That's a trip for 16. Fly to Quito, Ecuador. Then you fly out to the islands. You do a week there, and then you come back. And that's birds and a lot of snorkeling with the sea lions, but it's incredible birds. I mean, all the stuff that you've seen, and they're so habituated. There's no land predators. I mean, I've walked down a trail and had a blue-footed booby peck at my shoelaces. I mean, literally, you just don't need any big lenses. So I do that annually. Africa is the one I do the most, and that's either in their general wildlife viewing trips to Botswana. I do that. I also do Kenya and then Tanzania for the migration, and I do an add-on for the gorillas. I've done that, several times in Uganda. And then I also do a trip to Brazil for jaguars in the Pantanal, which is, it's a lot of birds, but, and there's a ton of birds, macaws and toucans and different things, but the real iconic critter is the jaguar, and you see them all the time. I mean, the last trip I went on, we had 22 jaguar sightings, and they're close. I use a 1 to 500 millimeter lens, and it's plenty.
I'm encouraged because I'm going in October.
Oh, good. Well, you're going to the spot.
You're encouraging me right now.
You'll absolutely love it. There's giant otters there. The birds are incredible. Cavens, capybara, but the jaguars are guaranteed, and that's a place where they're habituated to boats. I mean, the outboard motors don't even bother them. I mean, you get on top of them. I quit taking my 600. I take a 1 to 5. That's all you need. And then the other one that I do less often, but I've done it 4 times, is India for tigers. And generally that's people that have been places with me before, and they've kind of done the Africa, they've done the jaguars, and they say, what's the next level? And that's tigers, which I've seen them every time. It's a little bit more difficult, certainly than lions or jaguars, but it's something to see wild tigers in the forest of India. And there's a country that's pretty tore up, but just because it's so much poverty, and it really is a difficult place to go. I call it a cultural experience, not a vacation. But when you get to the parks, they are pristine, and that's why the tigers are there. And the lodges are nice. And so we do the Taj Mahal for a day, then we do 3 parks for tigers and tons of deer and other things, birds there. So those are the ones that I do on a fairly regular basis. I don't do India seems to pop up every 3 or 4 years, maybe every couple of years jaguars, but I do Africa every year and I do Galapagos every year.
Do you have? I'm always enthralled with the mountain gorilla experiences. Never had it, but just the intensity of being so close to such powerful and intelligent and aware beings. Do you have a favorite story from a trip that you've done there that you could share?
Yeah, the gorillas are I've taken both my daughters have been with me on that trip and the Africa trip, so on. And that's one of their favorites. And it's just because, as you say, they're so human-like and you can get so close to them. It's just an amazing experience to just be in the presence of those animals. And sometimes there's 8 or 9 and sometimes there's 20 of them, so they're completely surrounding you. But the most interesting thing that ever happened on one of my trips is that there was a trip that I went on, early on trip, and it was in Rwanda. And they take 8 people per group. So I had a group of 8, and they actually, a couple of them were good buddies of mine and their wives. So the first day, and the gorilla trekking can be easy, can be a 1-hour hike over, minimal terrain, or it can be a 5-hour hump like that. So this first one was a tough one. So 4 people dropped out. They just said, look, we're not doing it again. It's too difficult. Well, the next day, they should have gone because it's luck of the draw when you get there. And we got a real easy hike, 1.5 hours, rolling hills. So we were with 4 other people. There were 4 of us went, and 4 were people we didn't know. And we got with these gorillas, and we were sitting there watching him. And this silverback, 400-pound plus, he got up and walked within about, 10 feet of us and grabbed a tree that was, how big around, like that big around. And with one hand, snapped it off. Well, it crashed down and hit one of the other people, some lady. The tree hit her. It didn't really hurt her, but everybody kind of freaked out. But we were in such impenetrable brush, there was nowhere to go. And he walked over within 2 feet of where we were standing, broke the top of the tree out. That's all he wanted was the tender leaves at the top of that 20-foot spindly tree. Went back over and sat down and ate it about 8 feet in front of us. And you're just sitting there, just beyond belief that all this happened. Literally 3 feet in front of you. Now, they don't like you to get that close, but if they approach you, you just, stand there and, do one of these. But it was a cool experience just to be that close, And then another trip, they had a 3-day-old baby that was that you could get, amazingly close. In fact, the guide said, well, you want to get a little bit closer because this is a real relaxed female. And I was able to get my, get a full framer of the baby gorilla. So it really is incredible to have that experience. I usually do 2 days, and it's a hike. It can be either a 1-hour hike that's not tough, or it can be 4 or 5 hours is pretty difficult. So it just depends on what you get.
So at that proximity, are you shooting all wide angle?
Yeah, I've done the best with, like a 24-105 kind of a lens. I brought a 200 and I never use it, because you're just there. If you had I suppose, up to about 100, maybe a 200 would work, but I never use a 200 much. It's so close. And, they're a big animal. And also, when I took pictures of the baby, I was able to lean in and get, relatively close. They have a minimum distance you're supposed to be, but if they kind of move around and get close to you, just take, and then get some habitat shots. That's why kind of a small telephoto seems to be good.
Someday I will do it.
There you go.
So I don't know if you want to go here or not, but as far as this book, this project, you did it yourself. So if there are people out there that dream of self-publishing a book, Do you have a few pointers that could help get them started, or some perspective or cautions about what or what not to do if they're dreaming of self-publishing a book for sale? Obviously, not necessarily to this scale, but of anything that they're passionate about.
Yeah, I think that I was very fortunate that I had done two other books with this company. Um, and therefore, I really knew the people. The real key was the designer, who I'd already worked with twice, and then also the person that was kind of the ramrod of the whole thing, dealing, because it was, published in Hong Kong. Almost everything's published in either Hong Kong or China because of the cost savings. And they were real savvy on that. So I didn't have a lot of risk that I felt. I had experience. So I really didn't worry about the pitfalls. I suppose you need a reputable company, and especially somebody that the design is so important. You can supply them with the words, and you can supply them with the photos, and you can give them some guidance. But they're the ones that do, all the manipulation. And I had one that was Shirley's her name, but really a great gal. And she would then send me the pages, and I could tweak them and move them. And she never got upset in the fact that, oh, you don't like the way I laid it out, and I want this one bigger, I want this a little smaller, and she let me do all that. So, that's why it made it pretty easy on me, because I had a company I dealt with before that was reputable. So I really don't know what to say as far as pitfalls, because I didn't run into any. The main thing is you got to make sure when you do, they send you proofs, that the color is right, because whatever you see on the proof's the way it's going to be. And if it's way too dark or way too light, you got to nip that in the bud, or you're screwed, because once it goes to press, you're done. And you got 4,000 of these, and every time you look at it, you go, oh my God, it's way too light or way too dark or whatever. So,
it happens. I'll just
it
say
does
that.
happen, yeah.
I'll just leave it there. It happens, and you have to live with it. So I think that's one of the. Well, I think it's great advice that whoever you're having design it, that they have an open relationship, because it's your project, and are flexible with you and are skilled at it to create the publication, but also have the patience to review color and pages, and that's not always the case. So, and being confident that when it goes to press.
Yeah, you bet. It really makes a difference, and I was very fortunate with that.
Yeah. No, the reproductions are awesome. So in summary, then, you had 4,000 printed, and 90% of them are gone. You're down to 400.
Right. Yeah. What I did initially is that Ducks Unlimited was able to use a bunch of them, which raised money for them, and got me some of my travel back. And California Waterfowl did the same thing. But I sent I allowed about 500 to go to Amazon, and they sold immediately. But the problem with Amazon, as you guys know, is they step on it so drastically that all the profits in the retail, it's not in the wholesale, and it's not to the photographer or author. They get it all. So I only did 500 as kind of putting it out there for people to be able to see. And then once those were sold, I cut them off. So the only place you can get the book now is from me, because all of a sudden, the level of profit doesn't go to Amazon, and because I can't sell to Amazon direct. It has to go to a wholesaler first. They take a cut, and then it goes to Amazon. So I barely broke even on the thing when they did it. So it's down to getting them from my website, basically, is what it, and it's easy, because you just go on the website, you click on it, it goes to PayPal, boom, the order comes to me, we package it up, and you get it right away.
What is your website, Gary?
It is GaryKramer.net. GaryKramer.net.
Sorry, I promised you I was going to order mine, so I'm going to do it while we're talking here, so I don't forget.
And then go to books, and then it's just there. It's a pretty easy deal. But I did have 500 go to Amazon, and you can still look at Amazon and it says sold out. But that was just as you guys found out with your books and publications, they kill you.
retailers have their, even in a store, it's 50%. And it's important, I think, for distribution and for getting the name of a publication out, and so that more will sell, because as more sell, they are shown to more people that might visit their friends and see it and have a brother, sister, father, daughter, son that would love that too. And then they order it. So the more out there, the better. But when it's sold through retailer, the photographer or author doesn't get as much as I was ordering directly. So it's, again, I just want to encourage listeners and to be aware of that. And if you want to support an artist who creates their work, that if you do actually order it from their website, they get the most profit from it, which again it allows them to continue creating more of their great work. So, and most websites are pretty user friendly with the main servers that people use anyway, as far as paying and checking out. And PayPal is a good example of that, straightforward. So, yeah, if you care about the artist, and the same when setting up your own and selling them, you want to try to direct people through your website, because it's more profit that way. And even a published book, it's that way if the author sells it versus in a store. But obviously, the bigger the catch net, the better in a business, right? But you also,
and that's kind of why I did it. I wanted it to get out there to the general public and be able to order from Amazon. I also sent 250 to the Wildfowl Trust in England with the same. I mean, they're a nonprofit. The same thing I did with DU. I sent it to them for free, shipped it to England, which they didn't pay anything. It came in and it's in their bookstore. And now when they sell it, they keep half. The other half they send to me to offset my travel. But they got they got a pallet, showed up at their doorstep for nothing. But I wanted that to be able, for the folks in Europe to be able to get it, because that book shipped anywhere outside the U.S., like to Europe or Australia, the shipping is $100, as much as the book. So, especially and most of them are sold in Europe that are sold outside the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And this book is worth $100. I just want to say that, because at first gut response, people are like, wow, $100 for a book. But it's the volume and the work behind it. And it's and something else to reflect on quickly too is it's not just the cost of the book; it's all the travel, the guiding, everything that you did out of pocket to make this come to fruition. To have such, and I mean, I know I'm promoting this hard but it's worth it. I mean, really, if you are into waterfowl in any way, it's all there, wonderfully done. So there's all those elements. So for $100, it's a fantastic price for what you get.
Thanks. But what it is that I wanted to make the book really should have been sold for more money. But right. The idea is that because the way you price books, there's a standard way to do it, and it came out over that. But I wanted it to be $90 and then $9 shipping and handling. So I wanted to keep the price point right under $100. And that's kind of what it is. So it's $99 shipped anywhere in the U.S. And that was the goal to do it.
Yeah, that's amazing. You can ship this big a book for $9.
Yeah, well, I mean, media mail. It went from $9 to about $9.50 or something now, or $9.80. But at the time that it came out, it was $9, and that's media mail, which is, thank goodness for that, because if you were to pay for it for normal mail, it'd be expensive. Canada is $40.
Yeah, we don't have
$42 to send it to Canada because there's no media mail.
No, when I mail a book to somebody, it costs the same as it does buying it in the store just to mail it. But I do it because they want it signed to somebody, right? But this, this book, for the art in it and the volume, it's 100. Yeah, it should be $250, right? I mean, when you think about it,
7.7 cents an image is not enough, Gary.
You figured it out, right?
Oh, I got to applaud that. That's a great
start. I didn't know I was getting hurt that bad.
You got stung a little bit. I would have paid twice that much.
Yeah, right. Hey, thanks a lot.
At least 15 cents.
Thanks a lot, Ron.
And that, my friends, was the end of the photography business around the world. It collapsed at 7 cents an image. Yeah, there's more to it than that. But I mean, that's awesome. That's
I can't. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're not quite done, but I can't thank you enough for coming back on. And I'm glad that this time I had the opportunity to be here and to visit with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and hearing your stories. It's it's something that we all aspire to have the ability to do once the career is kind of winding down, is just have the ability to share. And I certainly appreciate you taking the time to do that.
Well, my pleasure, really.
Another thing I'm not sure about with just winging it here on the podcast. How's that, right? Waterfowl podcast, winging it.
There you go.
Yeah. Was there something else that you wanted to tease out, or are we good? I'm just, and if there isn't, that's fine. But I didn't know if
I got a new project I was going to throw out there.
Yes. Okay. What's brewing?
Okay.
Or cooking or smoking?
I had assumed that this was the ultimate last thing I would ever do, but I'd like to have projects. I'm better when I have the golden ring to grab a hold of and, have an accomplishment. So I didn't think I would do another book, but you guys are the first ones to know I have started already photographing for one more book, and I promise it'll be the last. And it's the working title is Highways in the Sky, the North American Flyways. And what I'm going to do, I did another book for Ducks Unlimited 25 years ago called Flyways. And this is going to be a real glorified version of that. My goal is, and I've already started it, is to photograph all the major breeding areas in North America, all the major migration stopover areas, both spring and fall, and then all the wintering areas in the U.S. and Mexico. And portray this on a flyway basis, and then broken down into those three divisions. And it'll be heavy on photos, a lot less text because it isn't going to be an ornithological type of book. So it's really going to be a photo book that's going to try to highlight not only the ducks' tight shots of the waterfowl, but a lot of habitat stuff. I've been a lot of places, and I've been renting airplanes. I've flew, a lot of different places, the prairie potholes already, the timber in Arkansas, up on the Arctic, and try to get a lot of that habitat stuff, and then supplement it with waterfowl photos. And then about 15% of it will be wildlife other than ducks and geese, this wetland-related wildlife. So it's going to be a story about the flyways, their importance both from a habitat standpoint and a waterfowl standpoint, and then try to depict that. It's going to be the same, at least overall size as Waterfowl of the World, a large format coffee table book, but obviously not as thick. I'm shooting for about 300 pages instead of 540. But I think that it'll be something that people will really appreciate, because we all know, especially as duck hunters, about the flyways, but we don't know the real details about it. You may know something about it if you're in Mississippi, you know about Arkansas, and you may know about Louisiana, but you probably don't know much about the Great Lakes, right? So on and so forth. So I've already been to Barrow and photographed the Arctic. I've already been to the boreal forest and photographed out of Yellowknife. And then this winter, it's nonstop to try to get the images, with the goal of getting this thing out in late 25 or early 26 is the plan. So one more under my belt, and it's another waterfowl, but it'll have more habitat, more other species to really depict what these flyways are and their importance, which I think
is so important. Yeah, and it's such a visual feast. It's amazing to see. Here in Lake Ontario, the spring and fall, it's just to see the rafts of ducks, of canvasbacks, and it's just all the different species. It's magical, right? That this happens at this time, at those times. So I think it's for conservation minded people, it's so wonderful to point out and make more and more of the population aware of the importance of these flyways.
Yeah, so that's kind of the goal, is to get that done. There's never really been, other than the one book I did, and it was a paperback a long time ago with slide photography. And I think that and I've been to the breeding areas. The migration areas. I went to Manitoba and photographed there this spring. Went to South Dakota, and I got trips planned all those places and so on and so forth for the next number of months. That's what I'll be doing.
If you hit Nebraska, let me know. It's not very far.
Well, I am going to try to do that. I'm trying to hit all the major areas. So
well, I'll reach out. I'd love to meet you down there, buy you breakfast or something after a shoot, and
there you
maybe
go.
get a chance to shoot together. But yeah, I can't wait to have you back on in 2026 so we can talk about that program.
There you go. There you go. One more, third time's a charm, right?
Can just out of curiosity, no pressure on this. Obviously, it'll happen down the road. If not, but is there a chance for people to pre-order it?
I really haven't set that up at this point.
Yeah. Okay.
That will probably occur in the summer of 25.
All right.
Because I want to make sure I get it all. And what's happened with, you were talking about self-publishing, the three people that were key with my last two books, that with the publisher, the proofreader, the designer, and the ramrod, have all these ladies. They're all my ladies, I call them. They've all retired, and they've all agreed to do this book for me, freelance.
Oh, that's great.
So I mean, how's better than that? It'd be my third book with the same three people. They're all retired. They said, "Okay, if you got one more book, we're on it. We'll do it ourselves. The four of us will do it." So that's gratifying that these gals are all willing to do that for me.
Mm-hmm.
So
that familiar expertise on hand. Yeah, and they're doing it because they want to.
Yeah,
which is wonderful too, right? Yeah, excited.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Well, thank you again for being on. It's I've been looking forward to this conversation. I remember when we started Beyond the Wild, there was a bit of communication about when we get together, and I was like, Gary Kramer, yes, we got to have Gary Kramer back on and hear about this, because you grab life by the horns and take on adventures to places that most wouldn't, and the stories behind the collection of images for this book and for what you're doing, it's fun to hear. You're always a great guest to have, so thank you for taking the time.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, guys, and let's stay in touch. If I get in your neck of the woods, let's get together for a photo shoot or dinner or something.
Absolutely.
I'd love that.
And I did just order my book, so
there you go.
I'm looking forward to having it.
Heard
all
the
right.
bing, the counter going behind Gary on the wall. Bing.
Yeah, right.
Well, this will air after we are back, probably being a few weeks out or so. But we're heading off in the same direction very soon, right? I'm heading to Alaska, and so are you, I think. So
yeah,
no
I'm
matter
out on Friday.
Yeah. So good luck and enjoy the far north, and have a great trip.
All right, you too. All right, thanks a million, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One of these days.
There you go.
Take care, Gary. Ron, see you next time, buddy. Everybody, thanks for tuning in for another episode of Beyond the Wild Podcast. That's a wrap for another episode of Beyond the Wild Podcast. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Pictureline.com, your online source for everything photography, and Canon USA. Follow us on Instagram at Beyond the Wild Podcast, and make sure to check out our website at beyondthewildpodcast.com for additional show notes, information, and photographs for all of our episodes. You can watch our podcast on YouTube, where we'll include video and photo content, and subscribe. We welcome your comments, questions, and feedback on all of our social media platforms. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Beyond the Wild Podcast. Until next time, embrace adventure in the great outdoors with a camera in hand.